Today, we're going to look at words that show contrast in English. You'll need this vocabulary when expressing an argument, when making a presentation, in written English. Nevertheless, all the words we look at you can use in everyday conversation too, to raise your English to a higher level and give yourself a subtlety of expression. However, do pay attention because some of the words are tricky and require concentration. But in spite of that, I'm sure you'll enjoy this lesson and learn a lot. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Let Them Talk, the channel that goes deeper into everything about the English language. So, when you're talking about a subject, both in written and spoken English, you need to present your argument in three ways. You need to show continuity or progress. In English, for this we use words like firstly, secondly, then, next. Then you need to use phrases that add information. And for this we use words like therefore, furthermore, moreover, and in addition. And we'll look at that in another video. But you also need to be able to express a contrast. And this is what we're going to look at today. So we're going to look at the words although, though, even though, despite, in spite of, whereas, while, however, nevertheless, and albeit. Let's get started. So, with although, though, and even though, you need two clauses, and each must have a subject and a verb. And these words link the two contrasting clauses. Although, though, and even though are similar, but there are some differences that I'll explain. First of all, let's have a look at some examples. Although I was tired, I decided to go to the party. So there are two clauses, each with a subject and a verb, with the second clause showing a contrast to the first. But you can switch it round without any change in meaning. Okay? I decided to go to the party, although I was tired. Now, if you're writing informally or in conversation, you could just use though here. Okay? So, for example, though he speaks English really well, he's a bit shy about speaking it in public. Okay? So though has the same meaning, but in formal written English, it's preferable to write although. Okay? Even though shows a greater contrast, maybe a big surprise. Even though he was injured, he still finished the marathon. He got an A in his exam, even though he only answered half the questions. Okay? So it's very surprising, so you use even though. You can also put though at the end of a sentence. For example, I had a big lunch. I'm still a bit hungry though. Okay? This is more informal, but very common in spoken English. And notice that if you are writing it, there are two sentences with a full stop, of course. So the construction is sentence, full stop, contrasting sentence, though. Okay? So for example, classical music is nice, full stop. I prefer jazz though. Okay? He's a very nice guy, a bit stupid though. It's starting to rain. I'm going out though. Firstly, let me say that there is no difference between these words. They are interchangeable, okay? Both these words precede a phrase, okay? In spite of and despite can be followed by a noun or a noun phrase. There is not necessarily a verb, but if there is a verb, it will be in the ing form. So it's one sentence about one thing with a contrast within it. Let's look at some examples. Despite his health problems, he continued climbing mountains. Okay, We went out in spite of the rain. Okay, notice there is no verb in this example. In spite of living in Brazil for many years, he didn't speak Portuguese. He lived in a small, wretched apartment despite having lots of money. We use whereas and while to highlight the contrast between two very different things or situations which are unconnected, but you link them with these words. They both have the same meaning, but whereas is more formal. So the structure is the first phrase, then whereas or while, and then the second phrase. So for example, you're rich, whereas I'm poor. You're short, while I'm tall. In Paris, it's cold and rainy, while in London, it's a beautiful sunny day. I live in the jungle, whereas you live on the top of a mountain. Now be careful, because while has a second meaning to talk about two things happening at the same time. Okay? So for example, while I was sitting on the metro, a man started singing me a song. Okay? So this is a completely different meaning, unconnected to the other while. So be careful about that. I'll give you one more example. I was watching telly while drinking coffee. Okay? Now, however and nevertheless are quite similar, and even native speakers get confused. Both words are adverbs that introduce a new sentence. So you will have two independent sentences, one contrasting another with however or nevertheless connecting the two. I'll contradict myself now because sometimes you can put however or nevertheless at the end of a sentence, okay? But generally it's like that. Okay, and generally speaking, again, however shows a contrast from a positive to a negative. So, for example, I'd love to meet you, however, I won't be in the country for the next 3 months, okay? I love my computer, however, the battery life is quite poor. So we're going from a positive to a negative, okay? Nevertheless is the opposite. Usually it goes from a negative to a positive. I'm tired, nevertheless, I'll make an effort to go to the party, okay? And as I said, sometimes you can use these words at the end of a sentence, especially nevertheless. So let's have a look at an example of that. My train leaves at 5 a.m. I'll be on time nevertheless. Now, here's when I'm going to contradict myself again. I did say that we use however to go from a positive to a negative, and nevertheless from a negative to a positive. But you can always replace nevertheless with however, but not vice versa, okay? Even though nevertheless is preferred going from negative to positive. But anyway, let's look at an example of when you cannot use nevertheless, okay? So look at this example. I don't usually eat dessert. Nevertheless, I will try their famous chocolate cake, okay? It's a logical transition. In both clauses, we are talking about dessert. You're taking one idea and you're showing a contrast within it. So nevertheless is okay. I don't usually eat dessert. However, I like spicy food. Here we are showing a contrast, but we're talking about two completely different things. We are not talking just about dessert anymore. In the first clause, we're talking about dessert. In the second clause, we're talking about spicy food. So in these situations, you can use however, but not nevertheless. So if you have any doubt, just put in however, okay? And finally, be careful because there is another word, however, with a completely different meaning, okay? The other meaning of however means it's not important how. For example, however many times I think about it, I still can't find a solution, okay? We can do that however you want, okay? So that's a totally different meaning. And one more point, you might also see the word nonetheless, which also has exactly the same meaning as nevertheless. It's just much more formal, but you might see that in writing occasionally in spoken English, so just be aware of that. And the final word is albeit, pronounced albeit. Yes, it used to be 3 words, albeit, and now it's just 1. Albeit is quite a formal term. However, I've noticed that in the last few years, it's being used quite a lot more. And it's not just my imagination, because I did some research and have a look at this graph. So now's the time to start using it. So albeit comes before an adverbial or adjectival phrase that makes a concession about a noun or a verb that comes before it. And the nice thing is that after albeit you don't put a verb. You could even just put one word, so it's a useful and flexible way of speaking. So do use it. Anyway, let's have a look at some examples and you'll see what I mean. He works very hard, albeit slowly, okay? It's a beautiful day, albeit a cold one. The restaurant was excellent, albeit a bit expensive. Easy, isn't it? So there you are. Different ways to show contrast in English. That was interesting, albeit a little difficult. But thank you for watching. Stay mellow, and I'll see you in the next video.